Show, and this is the Hank Cisco Show. Today I'm very honored to have guest Fred Connors, Connors Solutions. A little scary about Fred is that I was in the Army for 6 years and he was a major in the Marine Corps, so if we see anything going on, it's because of that relationship. But Fred, welcome to the Hank Cisco Show. And by the way, Hank, if you're watching, get better, get in here, we need you. Fred, you're a native Pennsylvania, right?
I
You're
am.
born in Pennsylvania?
Well, let me first say thank you for having me, Stan, and my best wishes to Hank. And I'm a big fan of his and have been, and I wish him the best as well.
The Cisco kid.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Don't lose the fight in the dressing room was one of his mottos, and that's
right.
good for everybody.
Leave it in the locker room.
So, Fred, tell me about yourself, your family, how many kids you have, your mom and dad. Just give a little background as to where you started from.
Sure. Well, where I started from was Germantown, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. My parents had moved there after they settled down and had a.
Your father settled down. Was he in World War II? Or
So he was in the back when there was an Army Air Corps, before there was a U.S.
Army Air Corps. Oh my God, yes.
Yeah, before there was a U.S. Air Force, he saw a little bit of the world and came home after that and went to Penn State and became a draftsman and worked a career in engineering and naval engineering there in Germantown, as a matter of fact, a company called Yarway, which eventually found its way to Bluebell, which is kind of comes full circle, which is where I live now.
So, so you lived in Germantown, and then
then we moved off to the Northeast, and eventually found ourselves in South Jersey. I went to high school at Cherokee High School in Marlton, New Jersey.
Cherokee High School in Marlton.
Cherokee High School, yeah. It was a great education. Started off as a Catholic kid, Catholic education. Went to public high school, so I got a little bit of a mix of both. And
by the way, I have the same thing with me. I came up in the Catholic school system, and then I went to Cheltenham High.
Yep.
The contrast.
Sure.
So yeah, I can totally relate to that. I can totally relate to that.
Yeah. But when I was in, I'm always a big fan of history and particularly military history, and that's kind of where my love or my attraction to service came from. And I in high school, played 3 sports, really thought I wanted to go to the West Point, the U.S. Military Academy.
You wanted to go to West Point.
Thankfully, I didn't go, because then I would have been an Army officer instead of a Marine officer, and I think
I would have liked that better. Tell me about your mom too. I'm sure she's been pretty interesting woman.
So my mom was a homemaker and a housewife and a businesswoman. And eventually spent a career in public school, public education as an administrator.
She was administrator in the public school system.
In the public school system, wound up her career in Cape May, New Jersey, as a administrative officer of the technical school there. She raised 4 kids, including myself, 3 others. 2 of whom are
brothers, sisters.
Yeah, so I have a younger brother who's in the Navy. Now he's settled in Virginia, and then of course my two sisters are both in education. One's a middle school science teacher, and the other is a former principal, public school principal, and now she's as a curriculum director in South Jersey. So education background, and I was kind of the odd bird that went. My younger said my brother served in the Navy, and I served in the Marine Corps.
So you're in high school, and you've got this feeling about history, and you thought you might go to West Point and stuff like that. So how did you wind up in the Marines?
Right. So
excuse me.
Something that I've corrected later in life, but I have to admit that I was not very good in math in high school. And West Point as a it started off as an engineering school, still very much a math and science directed place. You really have to do good on the math scores. So,
By the way, I know that because being in the Army, I was in the artillery and a forward observer
yeah.
And a battery sergeant, and we had to do a lot of math back then to figure out the points of contact. So math was,
That's right.
and you had to do it fast because the enemy was coming at you. You had to be able to rain fire on real quick.
For sure, and that's why I say I learned how to get very good at it in the Marine Corps. We had one of my jobs was a mortar platoon commander, which is kind of like small artillery.
Right.
It's the call it the battalion commander's hip pocket artillery. So we had 81 millimeter mortars, and you had to get your math down pretty quick. Yeah. So it's something I corrected later in life, but early on I was not great at math, and that kept me out of West Point. And I thought I was just going, after I wasn't accepted, I figured I'd just enlist and go off to as an enlisted man. And after one semester at Uppsala College up in East Orange, New Jersey, I went into after my first semester there, I went to all the recruiters, and I said, "Sign me up. I'm ready to sign up, and I'll do a tour as an enlisted man." And they all had their good programs. Went to everyone except the Coast Guard. There wasn't a Coast Guard recruiting station close by, but the only one that said, "I'm not going to let you enlist," was the Marine Corps, because they said, "Well, you're in college. You should stay in college. In fact, you must stay in college. You can go through our officer candidate program," and that's ultimately how I got my commission.
So you went through officer candidate program in college and became, so when you got out of college, you were like a second lieutenant or something like that?
I was. Yeah, I got commissioned in 1987 after college, and yeah, the rest is history.
Let me ask you this, there's a lot of young people here in the studio, but there's also a lot of young people that watch this. As a young person, what was it like when you got in and all the little trials and tribulations? Because I know a lot of young people think about going into the military. What are some of the pros and cons? If you were to mentor somebody going into that, what would you say to them? What were their expectations once you got in? How did you feel about that first day? Was it everything you thought it would be?
Yeah, so in the Marine Corps, the program is called the Platoon Leaders Course, right? So you learn how to become a platoon leader, and that's one of the things that the Marine Corps takes great pride in. Is every officer is trained to be a rifle platoon commander, to take 3 squads of Marines and
How many men?
so it's about 30.
And now it's
So
men and women.
It's in all the military occupational specialties now. It's open to men and women. But to take that group of 30 young people and lead them in the attack or offense or in the defense. And to this day, I remember the mission of the Marine Rifle Squad. Right? It's to locate, close with, and destroy the enemy by fire and maneuver, or destroy the enemy's assault by fire and close combat. Right? So that's what every Marine officer is trained to do.
So a young person going into a military service, especially into officer training or something like that, is really going to learn leadership, is really what it comes down to.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's the platoon leaders course, right? And you just heard me repeat, which is beat into my head, not literally, but repetitively, to learn how to accomplish the mission, right? And for me, if there's anything I took away from my 12 years in the Marine Corps is accomplishing a mission, right? That's what it's all about. And I've pretty much turned that into a career in my different pursuits. But how do you accomplish that mission? Take all the things that are available to you and to accomplish what the organization, what the company, what a community wants to do. How do you accomplish that mission?
So you kind of start at the basics from what you learned in there. So that's what you came out. Now, let me ask you this. How long did you actually serve on active duty?
Yeah, so I was 6 years on active duty. I left active duty to come home and run the family business, so landscape construction and garden center business out in Chester County. And I missed the Marine Corps and the camaraderie of being around Marines so much. I in addition to running our small business, I signed up for the Marine Reserves, where I eventually became very active in the Marine Reserves for another 6 years. So all in about 12 years.
Let me ask you this, Fred. You were in '87, 6 years. That was the first Iraq War was involved at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Did you go over? Were you deployed out there, or how did that work?
Yeah, so when Iraq, Saddam Hussein attacked Kuwait in the summer of
91 or
90,
92?
yeah. I guess it was 90.
90, yeah.
We were with something they called the Air Contingency Battalion. So we had 72 hours, I think it was, to be ready to deploy, and had all our stuff packed and ready to deploy.
So wait, 72 hours.
Mm-hmm.
How many people are you talking about to get together in 72 hours to do it?
Yeah, so it was a battalion reinforced to about 1,000.
So 1,000 guys, you got to get all their equipment, everything, and you got it shipped out in 72 hours.
Right, everything staged and ready to go.
Sounds like a logistic nightmare.
It was, again, things you learned back then, and you can utilize those skill sets, those tools, those lessons learned. Yeah, they come back.
Along with the mistakes.
And the mistakes, and that's what lesson learns are all about. Fortunately, well, fortunately or unfortunately, we did not fly away. We were held back, and eventually made our way to Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm on amphibious shipping, and we were supposed to be. Well, we were part of the 5th Marine Expeditionary Brigade, and we were going to be the great feint of, or wasn't a feint originally, but it was an amphibious landing into Kuwait.
Oh yeah, I remember that. That was the thing where they, Saddam Hussein was expecting the Marines to show up on the beach in an old World War II type of attack the island type of thing, and they threw a couple ships out there, lobbed a couple shells, and then they came around the back end.
That's right. A lot of amphibious shipping out in the Persian Gulf off the coast of Kuwait, and we made a pretty good show of it. And thankfully, for me and my Marines at the time, I was a mortar platoon commander, responsible for about 85 Marines. We came ashore administratively, as they say.
As opposed to hot.
Yeah, came ashore administratively in Saudi Arabia, and then followed the 1st Marine Division up. But those kind of lessons that being amongst Marines, and it was interesting.
I think it's hard sometimes for young people, especially, and even people who haven't served in the military, that type of commitment to go out and defend your brothers and sisters that live here in some fashion and put your life on the line. It's really the ultimate sacrifice that you can make, and I'm honored to have you that you were able to do that and accomplish that. So after you're in the military and you've been deployed out there, and you come back home, you get out, and then you get involved in the Marine Reserves, but then you got involved in this business. So and tell a little bit about the business itself. What does Connor Solutions do?
Yeah, so just to tag on to your last point there, I'm always a little embarrassed when people, especially around Memorial Day or Veterans Day, they say, well, thank you for your service. As I've just explained, I made a career out of the lessons that I learned in the military, and I almost feel like saying, well, thank you for letting me serve, because those experiences and those the hard lessons learned and the challenges and rising to them, I've been able to turn those into a lifelong career. And well, immediately after I left active duty, or my reserve time, I went to work again as a civilian, supporting the military. Worked for a company that
couldn't get that out of your system.
No, it was the excitement, the challenge of it all, and I deployed as a contractor to first to Albania, and then Kosovo.
Oh, that was during their civil war and everything
Yeah.
else. That was a pretty ugly event there, because I know it was a very, I remember that well that time. So you were over there as a civilian contractor.
Yeah.
And what did you do there?
So everything that I would have done as a operations officer in a Marine battalion or Marine support group, I did as a contractor, except I didn't have a weapon, and I wore blue jeans and a collared shirt instead of a camouflage uniform.
Well, the interesting thing is, in Afghanistan, we have a number of contractors. Even in Iraq, there was a number of contractors, and they were killed. If you remember, the contractors that were hung from the bridge in Iraq. So even though you're wearing blue jeans, I'm sure you're still putting your life on the line, so to speak, because there's some pretty ugly people there.
Yeah. So think of it as almost, there's a World War II movie, the Seabees, where you have
John Wayne.
Not John Wayne, Naval Construction Battalions, right? The Seabees. That's kind of how the civilian contractors are these days. So during the drawdown after the Cold War, back in the 90s, the U.S. military drew down, but they didn't draw down the trigger pullers, as they say, the pointy end of the spear. They drew down on the logistics and all the support personnel that get the military deployed and keep them sustained when they're overseas. And that drawdown left a big vacuum to be filled, and contractors filled that. There was a great peace dividend that during the 90s the Clinton administration capitalized on, because you didn't have all that overhead of support battalions and people doing, service members doing like food service and maintenance to tanks, but that's still, in a wartime environment, that all still has to get done. So look, contractors filled that bill, and that's how, to this day, that's how we go to war.
And they fill that bill, and they're not always on the paycheck or on the time clock at the time.
Right.
They're on individual
That's right.
things. So
you don't have to recruit them, you don't have to train them, they're already trained, they're ready to deploy. You use them.
So there's an
and they come
economics
home.
to that point, which gets to and we want to get into other stuff, but just going along with the military thing, I think when we fight a war like we've been fighting so long in Afghanistan and everything else, the millions and billions and trillions of dollars, and you really don't get any return on those dollars at all. It's basically poured into these countries. It's very difficult to sustain that.
It is.
Over time.
It is, and there's always another place that's brewing. I mean, we just read the headlines today. I mean, the travesty and the horror going on in Venezuela.
Yeah.
But here again, if I was still very active in that kind of work, and I am to a degree at Connor Solutions, we help in planning those kinds of support operations. You got to figure out how to do that, how to do crisis response.
What's the biggest thing you ever did as not in the military? Now you're doing this civilian contracting. What was some of the big projects you did that really were exciting?
Yeah, so I guess my time in the Balkans was, and did some time in Afghanistan and then in other bad and good places around the globe, but really where I learned my trade as a kind of crisis response management person was in the Balkans at the end of towards the end of the Balkan Wars, when you had civil war essentially in Kosovo between
the Arabs or the Muslims and
the Christians, and then as civil war threatened the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, I was there as a project manager responsible for a couple thousand U.S. and Macedonian employees supporting the U.S. military, and we were kind of caught in the middle of a civil war.
Would you have to build the bases and stuff like that?
Yeah, we built the bases, ran the airport, the military airport, supplied the U.S. military were there, and then of course there's rotations, right? So
you deal with the rotations of people in and out of it.
in and out. So the real corporate knowledge for these camps were the contractors who were there, and as the military units rotated through, we had to support them.
It's very interesting what goes into it. I remember reading that for every one person in the field, you need about a half a dozen people behind them to make this to make it work. So it's amazing how this all gets done, and you were right in the thick of it from the grunt, basically, in the trenches to actually creating the bases and all the other stuff, logistics, and you've taken that information out. I believe you have your master's degree, or
yeah, I do.
You have a master's degree.
I got a master's degree in regional planning. Now that's more. It was more of a city planning and urban, suburban planning. But here again, go back to the very beginning of my early career, and the same things that you do in a city planning, or in for instance, my hometown of Whitpain Township here in Montgomery County. Those same kind of lessons you learn if you're building a camp, or you're maintaining a military camp, or you're
maintaining facilities.
Maintaining facilities, or if you're trying to maintain a good hometown. With you have a police force, and you have public works department, and you have a recreation department, and all those things. It kind of all goes back to the beginning of what's the mission. What are we trying to accomplish? What are the tasks that have to get done to accomplish objectives, which accomplish the mission? And what are the mission, the vision, the values for your community or your organization? And it really all kind of comes full circle.
Yeah, I can totally appreciate that, because being Italian, we're into building a lot of stuff, and when you take a piece of flat ground and you say, okay, you're going to build a building, and all the things that go into it. Just to organize that stuff is pretty amazing. And I guess that's why there's a lot of failures in local type of stuff that we do, because not everybody's experienced enough to handle that. It's a lot more than just saying, oh, we got to fix a bridge, or we got to do something, or build a bridge. There's a lot more in the logistics, and we get caught up in that. I just wish we'd get it done sooner. So you got your master's degree where?
At Temple.
At Temple University.
Temple Ambler campus. Took classes downtown. Wonderful program. My wife is a physician, and we joke often that there was a degree deficit in the Connor household. So when we settled down, started having some kids, she said, well, you need to go back to school. I said, I want to go back to school. And law school just didn't feel right, and I think I had enough experience.
There's enough lawyers out there.
There's more than enough lawyers. I think my business experience was such, I didn't want to spend time. I had already learned a lot of business lessons, owning a small business, and then consulting with businesses and seeing how they run. So this great program at Temple Ambler campus in regional planning. So I was getting involved in my community. I was on the planning commission. I said, that seems like a really interesting program, and it was.
Did you have kids at this time?
I did. I had.
So your wife's a doctor, and did she work at a hospital, or she?
Yeah, at University of Pennsylvania at the time.
And what type of medical doctor is she?
She's a cardiologist.
A cardiologist.
Cardiologist.
So she keeps your heart in the right spot, then, huh?
Yeah, I married my cardiologist.
You married your cardiologist. There's no excuses in your household, then.
Yeah, and internal medicine and nuclear cardiology too. So
she's up there.
She's a lot of
I think I should bring her in for an interview.
You should. A lot of initials after her name. But,
yeah.
And we had two small kids, and I really got into that program.
In those type of families, sorry to interrupt you, but I'm just thinking, because I had 3 kids, but when your wife has got that type of position and all the demands on her, and you've got the other type, I guess it was a real shared system that you had to do to make it all work out and to raise these kids.
And it still is today. They're 11 and 12, and I'm on tap to pick them up after school and get them to lacrosse practice. So juggling a lot of balls, but it's I couldn't ask for anything better. It's
Yeah.
living the American dream right here in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania.
So in the military, you do all this other stuff, but the interesting thing is, I found in a lot of the interviews I've done over time, and a lot of the people that I've met, that military people who've served in the military, always seem to always get involved in their community too, because there's this, if you make the commitment to go in the military and put yourself in harm's way for your fellow man, your fellow countryman, it doesn't take much of a jump to do that. And now, I know that you're involved in your community. You started with the Planning Commission, but in many other things, so you're involved in any number of things with the community. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, so we talk to veterans, you and I, all the time, and I see them in business, in my community, and everybody finds a way to serve or not serve. We were called to serve in the military, and then maybe it's that military experience and going in harm's way. It's almost stamped in your DNA then to continue that service. And so many of the people that I run across have had similar backgrounds. But when settled down, we had our two wonderful kids. They came in short succession, 16 months apart. One of the things that they didn't get to see me serve in uniform, so I wanted to provide an example of service. And now it's often in a suit or in an American Legion funny hat and shirt, or my time at the Boys and Girls Club involved there.
That's something else that I noted, that you're in a very unique American Legion that has quite a history.
It does.
And I think you're also designated, from what they tell me, you're the local historian in that. So tell us a little bit about Whitpain. It's over in what community?
So it's in West Ambler.
West Ambler.
It's in technically, or by boundary, it's in Whitpain Township, but in our West Ambler village area, but really draws from the Ambler, Penn Lynn, Lower Gwynedd, and Whitpain, Bluebell areas. And we have about 100 members and a very active post, and we're continuing our service to our community, no longer in uniform, but continue the service. And the interesting story about the Daniel W. Dowling post in West Ambler, post 769, is it was formed by 18 African Americans returning from World War II.
So in other words, it's been in existence since the late 40s.
1945.
1945.
They built that post by their own hands, and they were in a segregated military. Of course, it was segregated then. So when they came home, and all the branches were segregated, and they were starting to get.
I think it was Truman who ended that practice back in 1947.
Yeah,
that was when he ended that.
Yeah. But what having been deployed in World War II, so they came home and there were segregated American Legion posts or segregated VFW posts. So the Dowling post is a historically African American post. Of course, now open and for many years open to all members. And I have the real privilege, and it's such a fun kind of responsibility to be the historian of post 769. So I get to learn the stories.
So what's the most interesting story about one of the members that you found out?
Well, the one, going back to my Marine Corps experience, is a gentleman who unfortunately passed away 2 years ago.
How old was
he? He was in his 90s.
So he was part of the greatest generation
He
then.
was indeed. Pewsley Lane from Ambler. He and his brother and another Ambler resident enlisted in the Marine Corps. And they were what in the Marine Corps we call the Montfort Point Marines. So they were the first black Marines to integrate the old warrior culture of the Marine Corps. And they're heroes to all of us in the Marine Corps, because the dignity and the class with which they carried themselves. So Pewsley Lane, Ambler resident, serves in the Pacific in World War II, comes home, Eventually settles down in New York. He was an engineer, worked for Lockheed, worked for Boeing. He helped design the first Marine One, the presidential helicopter fleet, and he passed away. And he was a member of our post. So that's, to me, that we have lots of great stories like that, but that's the one that.
So we're getting ready to wrap up the show, but I know there's one thing that really, in all the different things that you do, the other thing is you're on the Whitpain High School Advisory Board.
Yeah. So
which I hope you're teaching them about logistics there.
So again, I call myself a management consultant with a volunteering problem. I do a lot of volunteer gigs, that none of which will ever be billed to anyone. But one of the ones I feel most passionately about is my time working with the North Penn Valley Boys and Girls Clubs. And we have one in West Ambler called the Wissahickon Valley Boys and Girls Club. And by virtue of that, I'm involved with the Wissahickon School District's Superintendent's Advisory Council. And our mission is to help him and help the school board in Wissahickon close the achievement gap, right? So the achievement gap in this country for young people, because of their, no fault of their own, but their socioeconomic background or their environment, they're not doing as well as they could be in schools. And that achievement gap, when you don't do well on standardized tests, or you don't do well on having the opportunity to play sports or other organized activities, you start to fall behind, and you don't get accepted into the colleges and have the opportunity. So achievement gaps.
Or you don't have the drive to be successful in anything.
Right, because you don't have good mentors and a good background and
So you
good
have to do
environment.
that. Well, as we, and I just in all of everything that you get involved in, and it's great that we have people like you in our community that, that are private business but find the time to do all these voluntary stuff because it's in your DNA, really, as a military person. In closing out, why don't you just let people know it's Connor Solutions.
ConnorSolutions.com. You can visit there and learn a little bit more about me. Certainly Whitpaintownship.org. I have the real privilege of being the chairman of the Whitpain Township.
That's right, we forgot to mention that. You were also the chairman. Holy cow, you get home and go to sleep once in a while? I don't know.
Well, again, we pointed out before, I have a great family support system, and
I think it's great.
Busy people get more things to do, and that's
yeah. There is the old saying, 10% of the people do 90% of the work, which sometimes you find that's true.
Yeah. So just I'll leave you with this thought. You are quite a historian, amateur historian, as am I. One of my favorite quotes, it's really become an ethos for me, is Lincoln's just paramount quote about, "I like to see a man proud of the place he lives. I like to see a man or woman live so that his place will be proud of him." I think that's what you do in your community, and that's what I try to do in all my pursuits. But I want to be proud of the community that I live in, and I want them to be proud of the way that I conduct myself.
Well, I'm sure they are. Fred, it's been really great to have you here today. And I'll just leave you with the quote from Hank Cisco. One of my favorites is, if you're going to walk on water, make sure you know where the rocks are. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next week.